Welcome, everybody. I would like to thank you all for taking part in this event. To commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the Policy Center for the New South sponsors this webinar under the theme, Are Development Challenges Really Intractable? How the UN can play a bigger role in solving them. I'm Eduardo Haddad, Senior Fellow at Policy Center for the New South and Professor of Economics at the University of São Paulo in Brazil, from where I speak. I'll be the moderator of this event, which counts with three very distinguished speakers. Ms. Chidiogo Akunyili, founder of Shirors, Ms. Doreen Mashu, development consultant and founder of The Good Heritage, and Mr. Mouhamadou, senior economist at the Policy Center for the New South. Besides achieving peace and security, which is the primary objective of the UN, the mandate of the World Organization includes the promotion of human rights and international cooperation in solving economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian problems. At the same time, the Charter entrusted the organization with the task of serving as a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. This implies that development is the duty of national governments with the help and assistance of the international community through the process of cooperation. The increase of the membership of the United Nations in the 60s and 70s triggered a dynamic of claims for a new international order and the recognition of the development as a fundamental human right. This claim was resisted by the countries of the North, who insisted on national responsibility for development while recognizing the role of Bretton Woods institutions, foreign development aid, and foreign investment. The UN system, in both its normative and operational dimensions, offers the comparative advantage of neutrality vis-a-vis national politics. However, the role of the funds, programs, and specialized agencies of the system remains limited to advocacy, policy advisory functions, consultancy for governments, and project implementation. The adoption of Millennium Development Goals followed by the Sustainable Development Goals as means of providing policy coherence and facilitating the mobilization and allocation of resources did not yield tangible results for most developing countries. Are development challenges really intractable? How can the UN play a bigger role in solving them? To debate on this challenging topic, I invite our three speakers to present their 5-minute initial remarks, starting with Ms. Chidiogo Akunyili, followed by Ms. Doreen Mashu, and then Mr. Mouhamadou. Ms. Chidiogo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Eduardo, and it's such a pleasure to be connected with my esteemed co-panelists. I think in this moment in time, there is so much happening in the world, and this question of how, the definition of that word intractable is hard to control. I had to look it up, right? Are these challenges hard to control? Are they impossible? Basically, is the question that we're facing today. The last months, the world has been faced with this incredible crisis that we're all very much familiar with, that is COVID-19. And within this, what has struck me is the power of collective action. This is not to say that we are beyond this epidemic as clearly, this pandemic as we're not. We're very much entrenched in it, but within it, you really see the power of will. The power of the will to come together, to work together, to unlock resources, to unlock human and financial resources, to target it at a very real and pertinent issue. So with this very interesting example of the action that can happen in short weeks and months by government, by civil society, by various organizations around the world to mobilize and pivot overnight, so to say, in the realm of the speed with which our organizations and institutions have worked. So what this shows us is that it is very much possible to achieve quick and effective change, but it's a question of the will. And I believe that this is where we're at a crossroads. The will is simply not strong enough. And why is that? COVID was very much in our face. People personally, from the greatest leaders, as we've seen, from the greatest nation to the smallest individual. No one is spared. Your money does not spare your power, your influence, and this goes for the individual as well as the nation. So for the first time in the human experience and experiment, we find ourselves on a version, not fully, because of an equal footing, where you are not suddenly exempt from being human by virtue of where you live and the access you have. Even though you're still very much shielded by that, you're a little more human. And in this moment of this shared fear, we see our ability to make changes. But these changes, this moment is also very much short term, and it could be, it's of course a bigger thing, but this is to say, what is the will that we have to make big changes? And I see the issue as that we are constantly in a cycle of short-termism. And then within this short-termism, at the core of it, sometimes, because you mentioned specifically government, and you mentioned the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, incredible institution, 75 years down the road, often we look at reactivity as opposed to really long-term thinking and planning. This is my own personal experience of the way the world has been working and the space that we find ourselves in. And as long as we continue in this path, not only of short-term thinking, but also of being far removed from the issue in a way that we don't personally feel it enough to act fast enough. And here I'm talking about of course, climate change comes very much to our mind, but you mentioned the SDGs and the MDGs, and within that, we're talking about various human rights and access. We saw this summer with the racial injustice, how that has come to the forefront. We see constantly how this virus and this pandemic has impacted women in a very disproportionate way, and of course the poor in a very disproportionate way. So all these issues have always been real. Health crisis have always been real, but it seems like it's only become real now that everybody is affected. And I think this is the issue, that short-term thinking of it does not affect me now. This is not a problem in this space. This is a bigger problem, a faraway problem. This is not a problem that would affect me in my term in office or in my space in this moment of leadership. There's something else that I can focus on. This someone else can take care of. But the truth is that this is that pivotal moment that we had all these decades ago in the formation of the UN. That time has come again where we must be very conscious that this new world order demands our attention. And if we don't act now, if we don't redesign from a short-term thinking to a long-term thinking that also encompasses more of global thinking of the people behind it and the needs of the people, and addressing this cankerworm of inequality that continues to spread and spread. And we see that in Nigeria now with NSAS, where the voice of the people, it's really people speaking up against police brutality. We saw that in the United States, and all of this stems in inequalities, systemic level problems that must be solved. So to your question, we can solve this if the moment that we're living in, we acknowledge it as very powerful, because we have now precedents of how quickly we can act if we want to act. We have precedents of what happens if we don't act. And we also know that our actions matter. We see that now more than ever in this globalized village. One little virus changed the whole world. So what is your positive virus, so to say, in this let's say of course, it's the United Nations, but really every institution, individual, what is your contribution? And I believe that is the way the world order can be shaped, the new world order, where we're all taking individual and collective responsibility that is anchored in caring for one another in this philosophy, African philosophy of Ubuntu, knowing that our interconnectedness and anytime that we don't act in service of the whole is weakened. You're on mute, Eduardo.
Excellent point. I'll move to Doreen. We'll get back to this inequality issue in a few moments.
Thank you, Eduardo. I am also very happy to be here, very glad to be here. I am joining from Harare, Zimbabwe. So I think I'll take this topic from where I'm sitting. And for me, like my colleague Chidiogo, I had to Google this word, right? Intractable. I had to say it a few times and Google it and really try to comprehend it. And in looking at the definition, the thing I took away from it was it's something that is stubborn, right? Stubborn. We know stubborn people. Are we saying that achieving equality and achieving the SDGs is a stubborn problem? I want to come out right now and say, yes, it is. It's stubborn, it's difficult, and that is why, the UN, and we're thankful for the UN's leadership on this, has kind of come with this way of trying to make these challenges manageable and more understandable by breaking it down into specific goals, right? The SDGs, just small phrases that are easy to understand and easy to tackle. Also from, the history of the MDGs that were, maybe a bit more complex, but still trying to achieve the same thing. Can we break this thing into achievable goals that we can then work on? So yes, it is challenging, it is stubborn, but I think for me, what I keep asking myself is, whose responsibility is it anyway, right? Me as an individual, society, business, government, what do all those players have to bring to the table to make this work? If something is challenging, right, anything challenging we face in our lives, we look at different ways of solving it and we bring different players to the table and we listen to each other and we ideate and we innovate and we make a mistake, but you come back and you're better at it. So I think it's the same with this. I think that understanding our roles that we all play, no matter where we're sitting, developing countries, and like I said, the role of everyone from society to government, we need to understand that and continually negotiate what we're bringing to the table to lessen the challenges. I'm hopeful. I know SDGs were, it's kind of a 2030 agenda. We're 10 years to 2030. Of course, COVID came in and really kind of threw us all off. No matter who you are, you notice that something had changed in the world. You had to look within. Like I said, I'm in Zimbabwe. We had to look. Unfortunately, logistics changed around the world. A kind of a positive thing was that most of the things that we import, we couldn't anymore all of a sudden because they were taking much longer to get to us. So we had to look within and say, what solutions do we have here in Zimbabwe to certain problems? So that's one of the things that I just wanted to highlight to say that I think that, we were on a path to achieving these SDGs. COVID came and woke us all up and really showed, kind of in Shona, in Zimbabwe, we have a saying that says, to show, kind of to air your dirty laundry in public, pretty much. We all were exposed, developing world, especially with our ill healthcare systems, etc. We really had to look within. So I know we'll get into a deeper discussion, but I think for now, I'll just say, yes, they're intractable, they're stubborn, they're challenging, but we can do it if we come together.
Excellent, Doreen. Thank you. Now, Mouhamadou, for your opening remarks.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Eduardo. Thank you to my two co-panelists, and welcome. Yes, it's a real pleasure to be here with you, Eduardo, with the panelists to discuss this important issue of development challenges. Yes, indeed, it's a challenge. It has always been a challenge, but I will start by the end to say that these challenges are achievable. They are really achievable by 2030. Perhaps in the discussion, we will explain into more details why we are so hopeful, why we have so many hope regarding this issue. But if we come back to the topic of our webinar that are putting us together today, when we talk about development, development has an ultimate goal where all human fundamental needs are satisfied. We see that a lot of efforts has been done, both by the international community, UN, etc., bilateral partners, multilateral partners, and also by countries themselves. If you look at simply the figure, if you compare, for example, from the early 90s to 2015, 2015 when the MDGs ended and the SDGs take the lead. If you look at, for example, in 1980, in the world, globally speaking, 36 of world population was living in extreme poverty, meaning that having less than $1.90 per day. In 2015, at the end of the MDGs, this fall up to 10% of global population, showing that lots have been done. But you have some kind of heterogeneity in the world. If you look at, for example, South Asia, the Caribbean, South America, Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, you have different performances. And if we are interested, for example, in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, we see that poverty is still high. This year, before the COVID, it was something like 41% of the population living in extreme poverty. This is very, very important. And the things did not significantly change between 1980 to up to now. And in some places, we see that the situation gets worse in some countries. In other countries, we see that you have good performers. It's one of the reasons why I said earlier that these challenges, we can achieve them. But the right policies, the right reforms need to be implemented in both in the countries, inside the countries, and in the international community. And UN is an example of that. And if you look at, if we go into more details in that poverty issue, we have two kind of feelings. We are happy of this augmentation of poverty. This makes us, in a sense, happy. I will explain in a minute. And in the other way, it creates some worries. Why it creates some worries? Because poverty increased because of conflictual situation in many countries, inequality increasing, the sector education, very challenging in a lot of developing countries, not only in Africa, but everywhere in the global south. The supply of electricity, for example, which is an important determinant of poverty. Supply of electricity is very challenging in many developing countries. In the other way, why it creates hope? It's because when we look at the development path, if you look at South America, Southeast Asia, and East Asia in general, you see that development path has two phases. Okay, you have a first phase where when the countries start its development path, you have inequality increasing, unemployment increasing, but this is normal. It's part of developmental process. You have low-skilled jobs, etc., informal sector that are receding, where you will have a larger manufacturing sector and larger service sector that are demanding of skilled workers. So it's normal that poverty increase, unemployment increase. But in the second step of development, you will have a kind of convergence in terms of income and in terms of living standards inside the country. So if we look at this, these two phases, we see that this is kind of happening in Africa and in all developing countries in the global south. But now, why, to answer directly to the topic, the thing is achievable. It's achievable simply because some countries did it also. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, we have Mauritius, not very far from Zimbabwe, but in the other side, Mauritius. You have Cape Verde, not very far from me in Dakar. They upgraded, for example, Cape Verde was an LDC, least development country, and they upgraded. Mauritius, we see the important performances. So we can succeed. Development is not something a kind of something we're dreaming about since the independence, since the 1950s. No, we can reach it. But all this, the question is we need to implement the good policies, but not just implementing the good policies in as we like, no, but in the right path, reforming the different sectors. So I think we can come back to it into more details.
Yeah, thank you, Mouhamadou. Let me stick to you with and I have a question. Given your expertise on development economics and having worked with several international development organizations, you described very well the path of development, mentioning that throughout this long-term positive path, there are a lot of inequality going on. And let's look at the institutional aspect of it based on our theme here, which is the role of UN. My question is, why isn't the Economic and Social Council, which is supposed to provide guidance in economic and social affairs to all UN agencies, playing a prominent role in development? What reforms do you foresee that are needed to be undertaken to enhance the effectiveness of the UN system for development? In other words, do you think there is a role for the UN to speed up the process of convergence, or it's up to countries to do it by themselves?
Yes, thank you, Eduardo, for this important question. You see, if you look at the UN, if you look at the UN were either kind of son or the daughter of the Society of Nations, and it was born after Second World War. Development issues, peace, security, etc., is in the core of the mission of the UN. And since their creation, since they were created, development is very important in the UN, in its missions, etc. If you look at how it is organized, you have IMF, World Bank, UNDP, FNUAP, etc. You have a lot of agencies. And development has always been a core mission for the UN, not only for the developing world. We should remember that at the beginning, we have the Marshall Plan, and the UN backed the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, etc. So this has been all the time in his mission. But what we forget all the time is UN is an aggregation of countries. You have UN dealing with issues related to development, but you have France doing the same. You have a development agency for France, you have the USA, you have Canada, you have Russia, etc. All these major countries in the UN, they also have their own development policies and all development priorities. Okay, so after the Second World War, what we have the creation of the Marshall Plan, and 20 years or 15 years after, some developing countries get their independence. Okay, and we all know the situation at that time. You have Cold War. Okay, so all countries giving development assistance, the primary goal was not to develop those countries, it was to serve special interests. Okay, so the UN was was just alone. You have France with their development priorities, US, Russia, etc., etc., etc. So the UN was just the kind of, in French we say, the parent pauvre of the development. Okay, the orphan of the development. So this has continued. Okay, the UN is mainly 5 countries in the Security Council. Okay, the most richest countries that were giving development aid, but with their own priorities. This continued for almost 20 years, up to 1975, 1980. At that time, what we discovered that those countries that we were helping, they are overloaded of debt. They have important level of debt. Okay, right? They give them the money that they couldn't even spend. We know the term éléphant blanc, what we call in West Africa, éléphant blanc. Okay, so we have seen in some countries where they built kind of infrastructure without knowing the purpose of that infrastructure. So this is the situation we had in the mid 70s, early 80s. So we entered into sectoral plans. Okay, so just to wrap it up, and the development issues came back 10 years later in the 1990s, where the UN came back in the core of the debates. But to be more precise, I will finish with that. For the UN, inside the UN also, I will see 2 areas of reforms. I will see, first of all, coordination. One problem of the UN is coordination.
That's a key.
You have a lot of agencies doing the same thing in the same country. Okay, go into Senegal, you will find at least 10 UN agencies doing the same thing: childhood health, etc., mother health, etc. You'll find 5 or 6 agencies. So they need coordination between the agencies. And second is, if you look at the UN, in their good intention, they create some kind of categories of countries. You see the LDC, least developed countries. You see the SEEDs, small island developing states. Okay, a group of countries that are considered as vulnerable, should be helped, etc., etc. And still in a good intention, the UN is doing a plaidoyer for kind of trade, international facilities for those countries, etc. When we look at those trade facilities, those trade agreements, we see that they are not really creating the good incentives in the countries. Okay, for example, you give a trade agreement for Senegal to export just his pear nuts without transformation. Okay, so this agreement will continue for 20 years, but you will never see a structural transformation. You will never see a manufacturing sector that will emerge from this country. So these I see possible.
Yeah, these are very, very good points. And talking about white elephants, we built a lot of them here in Brazil for the World Cup. Right? A problem. I think it's a problem everywhere. There is a let me come back to a point that Chidiogo mentioned, which is related to the pandemic, right? That brought up some good things that we see in different parts of the world, as was mentioned by Ms. Chidiogo, as the power of collective action, the power of will to work together. And I would like to ask Ms. Doreen Mashu, before I come back to Ms. Chidiogo, because the pandemic changed our lives dramatically. We all see that, we all live that. It has also brought change all over the world. And in this context, I would like to ask you, what are the prospects for developing countries of achieving the SDGs in the light of the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19? How do you see this issue, where we are going after COVID-19 in terms of achieving the SDGs?
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you, Mouhamadou. I learned a lot from your response there. So COVID, changed lives, like you've said, and I think that, as I was saying, starting to say earlier, it made us look within, right? So we struggle, the developing world, and I'm not going to paint everyone with the same brush. I'm just going to speak from where I'm standing. There's the big reason, I think, why we have not moved so much on the SDGs. I think some will argue that is because of corruption. So we have governments that are, unfortunately, may not be looking at or thinking about these development issues in a way that is equitable and in a way that even the resources within a country go directly to benefiting the poor and to move people out from poverty to prosperity. So, however, I do think that COVID, with that ability to look within and to take a step back, because a lot of the countries reacted by having a lockdown, which was detrimental to a lot of our informal workers, informally employed citizens. But that allowed people to really think and innovate and think about, how do I then survive if I can't wake up and go to the market every day? What can I do? And for some, it's a difficult question to answer, obviously. But I think it brought up a few opportunities, and I would like to bucket them in a few different areas. One is technology, the use of technology. So I think that what I've seen is that even the smallest of the SMEs, of the micro enterprises, are now looking at technology to see how they can continue to make sales, to keep their retail businesses up, to reach their customers and their clients in light of COVID. So it really helped, if there was ever a story for leapfrogging using technology, I think COVID really brought that to bear. I've seen technological innovations in education, trying to keep kids of school going age, continue to keep them engaged by whether it's a community laptop or a community iPad that people gather and are socially distanced, but watching content, educational content. I've heard about those innovations in a few African countries, and telehealth under the technology bucket. Also starting to see if we can really get healthcare from home, because it wasn't possible to be out and to be in hospitals, etc. Still a long way to go, but a few companies, a few startups have come with that solution. And then another bucket really is, for me, I think, this diversity of sectors. A lot of our countries took a hit in terms of tourism. Tourism suffered a lot, as you can imagine, and it's an industry that a lot of our countries rely on for employment and income for the government, etc. And because that wasn't possible, I think it forced us to look at what other sectors can we really invest in. If this were to happen again and tourism takes a hit again, what else can we really do internally within the country that can generate that income? The next bucket is really what I'm calling discourse or conversations. I've seen a lot of just people coming together. I think maybe it's the time away to really think and reflect, to think about our problems, to think about things like import substitutions, which I mentioned earlier. When you can't get the things that you normally import, what are you going to do internally? I'll use an example of Zimbabwe, and maybe I'll tie in my startup here, The Good Heritage, which is really focused on using the underutilized resources within the country and bringing responsible consumer goods to people to consume, So thinking of what can we do around import substitution, what can we use that's already here, and how can we use that to uplift people from poverty to prosperity? Really, at the core, I think my startup is really about generating additional incomes for farmers.
Mhm.
So what I realized is, they're in between farming seasons, farmers really struggle, which is why mostly you'll find that people say, poor farmers, the poor farmers of Africa, or the poor farmers and the poor farmers, and it's not changing. So what can we do to really get them to earn additional income and not just rely on farming seasons, which could be up and down with the impact of climate change? So things like adding value to your produce to preserve it, and only bringing it to market when it's, when the supply is low and there's higher demand, things like that. And yeah, I think those are the buckets, and I really want to underscore this because this kind of tends to be a sore topic, but the issue of corruption, unfortunately, even with COVID, it was an opportunity, unfortunately, for some governments and some ministries, etc., to use that to propel corruption, etc. We really just need that. Is why when I was talking about whose responsibility is it, we really need our governments to really look and put the development agenda first before anything else. So that's what I see. And of course, we're waiting to see what studies will come out of this period so we can really put numbers to this prospect as the time progresses.
That's important, evidence-based. Yeah, that's Chidiogo. Let's move back to the discussion on your initial remarks that were very stimulating in the following sense from my perspective. You mentioned that despite the fact that COVID has shown us some good opportunities in terms of as you mentioned, the power of collective action, the power of will to work together because of the shared fear, we all face the same virus, right? The within country impacts are very uneven, very heterogeneous within country. Let's take Doreen mentioned the issue related to technology and education. Here in Brazil, that was a solution, but unfortunately, in many parts of the country, kids didn't have access to the devices. If they had device, they had poor connection, right? So the impacts were very uneven, right? And before COVID and after COVID, every region, every group, they face their own viruses. It's not the same virus that people share. So my question, I'd like to listen to your view on within country inequalities. How do you see within country or interregional social and economic inequalities hindering development, especially in Africa?
Thank you for that question, Eduardo. I would mostly be building off a lot of what Doreen said. I really love how you laid it out, Doreen. So how are these within country inequalities hindering development? Well, I think it starts with a point that Mohammed was making earlier around how there are different realities across the different regions, and we might want to bucket it into these the buckets that he mentioned of small island economies or lower income countries, etc. But ultimately, even within those buckets, the realities can be very, very different. And I think this is one of the challenges. This is one of the things hindering within countries and regions, is the inability to potentially see the nuances. Doreen talked about tourism, for example, and I come from Nigeria. That's not a big sector for us, but at the same time, foreign direct investment and this travels happening across the world with Nigeria and the external world are very much a part of our economy. It's not tourism, but it's business. So that also is impacted by COVID. So what's the nuance of that? She talked about the importation and the challenges on not receiving the goods that we're used to, and how we can substitute. This is something that is a shared challenge in many. I'm going to really focus now on African countries. So this is to say the nuances of inequalities and realities matter. And we are approaching them from such a high level. We are in this conversation talking about the UN. And when we do want to narrow down, I think Mohammed was talking about how the different agencies within a place might end up all doing the same thing. So that lack of coordination becomes then an issue. So within these countries, within these inequalities, what is hindering development? I'll step back. I'll start with the individuals. Do they have an understanding of their own power, of their own ability to be part of this change, this development that is such a big word, but it almost disempowers you because someone else has to develop you. Someone else has to give you. So I think this has become a narrative that is inherited from many years of aid and dependency and a sense of needing this more advanced communities to support us. And there's a truth in that, but we've reached a point where we must take stock and really review the narratives around our own development to switch that story from that of dependency to an ownership of the solutions within these challenges. Doreen mentioned how within this very critical time, that leapfrogging that we've been talking about for so many years is happening. People taking advantage of technology and finding their own solutions. So what are you seeing is that when there is no other option, people find a way. And this is not to say not to give options, but this is to say to have more faith in the power of the people, to be very critical parts of solving the problems that exist. But corruption comes into play because you cannot be strong as a person, as a startup, as a business, if you're constantly being disempowered either by a narrative of your own dependency or by a reality of a system that is not allowing you to put your best foot forward by various issues of access to finance, red tapes, inefficiencies, and just lack of support or belief in you and what it is that you can do. We're seeing on social media a lot of tweets and shares on a Nigerian startup that's raising so much money, and there's almost a surprise, like, oh, we can do it as well. We have this capacity. Of course we can do it, right? So if I had to really speak to the summary of what I'm saying is that we have come from a long history of feeling like we don't know the way forward if someone does not come to show us that way. And this is the story this is the facts of the history that we inherited of colonialism and decolonization and lack of skill sets and the building blocks that had to go into that. We are now in a part of history where this young generation, the generation before us, there is such an incredible capacity to tackle the greatest challenges that face us, but support is needed for others to believe enough in us that we might even believe even more in our capacity. And to believe in you is not just in words, it's the support that is needed. So if I had to summarize this in the context of the UN and how these inequalities, however nuanced that they are and the differences across countries, the commonality is to listen to the needs of the people in a way that empowers their solutions to come to the front, in a way that empowers their capacity to step in as agents of change to blossom. The top-down aid and sort of like collective action informed change and inputs is not working anymore. So I really believe that what is hindering is that disempowerment in the structure, and what can really unlock so much is should we empower the people in a way that is, we see, I mentioned the NSAS movement, or that is happening in Nigeria, is the people stepping into their power and knowing that they have a voice. And of course, this comes up in a sort of demonstration, but what if we can channel this power of youth, of entrepreneurs, of startups, of business, and put them on the pedestal of knowing that they hold the key, and the government can step in as agents of supporting that ecosystem. The United Nations and international organizations can step in a role to support these grassroots. It's not even grassroots, it's this incredible future of businesses that will solve the issues, the nuanced issues that their communities and their countries and their cities are facing, that I find is the way forward in this world of widening inequality, but with incredible potential for solution.
It's a bottom-up solution, could I say that?
all hands together solution.
Okay.
It can be top down, it can be bottom up alone. Both sides come together in truth and in honesty, not with power dynamics, but in true knowing that this is the only way we can move forward and to unlock the potentials that exist.
We are running out of time, but we still have a few minutes. So to conclude, I will allow you just 1 minute for each speaker for sharing with us their final remarks or message. And let's see who goes first. Let's say Doreen this time. Please, 1 minute.
Sure, thank you so much. And I think, I'll just say what I wrote down here as my friend Chidiogo was speaking so eloquently. I was wondering if we increase the role of private sector, so arrow up for private sector and arrow down for aid, and see what that brings up. And I'll just leave it at that.
That's a good one. Mouhamadou, 1 minute at the mic.
Okay, thank you very much, Eduardo. Just a final word would be to say that the words itself, the UN, the countries, should go into a new paradigm, a new paradigm of development. Development as it used to be before the North coming to help the South, etc. This can continue, but only that will not lead us to development. Things I think everybody has understood now. If you look at what happened in all other regions of the world, development comes with regional integration. So Africa, Latin America, South Asia need to be deeply integrated with creation of trade hubs, etc. This will lead us with a little help, the minimum of aid to the development. So this, I think, should be the new paradigm.
Okay, thank you, merci. Chidiogo, your turn.
On that new paradigm, acknowledging that we are in a critical moment in time, that time that history will talk about and review and revisit. And as with any pivotal moment in history, you can go left, you could go right. And the direction that will benefit us as a global village that we are, as we've experienced ourselves to be by what this virus has showed us, the interconnectedness that we can't deny. Moral leadership is needed. Ego will not get us there. Thinking of I and my country and our needs will not get us there. Thinking selfishly as a leader, one's own benefit, any sort of ego-driven, self-driven leadership is going to lead us in the wrong direction. We can understand that to be a fact of the future. So what we need now more than ever is that moral compass, and we all know it and feel it in ourselves when we see it. And it's something, it's almost encoded in our DNA to know the path that is correct for us. And our leaders must embody that now more than ever. And remember what I said about empowerment, our leaders are us, it's every single one of us, right? Should understand our own role in leadership and step away from a narrative of disempowerment and go deep within ourselves, Doreen's word, and find the truth of what is right and what is it that I can do. And in that, some of us can support others, some of us can step in more, whatever that is, find your moral compass and direction, and we will make the right choices for the future, for our children to come, for generations to come.
Okay, excellent. I'm afraid we ran out of time. I would like to close this very, very stimulating webinar by thanking you, our 3 speakers, and those that are watching us. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and I hope to see you in the near future. All the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.